Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Robin, or A Hobbit's Reading List, and today we are going to talk about all the books I read in August. So in August I read 6 books, and there are a couple reasons why it's a little bit on the lower side. It's not the lowest reading month I've had. That was March, where I think I had 4. But it is below average for me. I typically average about 7 books a month, and so it's just like right there. And there's a couple different reasons. One is because my TBR game, TBR Pursuit, gave me like 4 nonfiction, and I think most people will relate to this, is that you just read nonfiction slower because you're learning. It's not a story that you're picturing in your head and you're just like breezing through, like you're learning. And so I did read 2 nonfiction books this month. That partially explains why it was a little slower. The other reason is that I started school at the end of August, and I had to, in the last week of August, had to switch over to essentially my September TBR and start reading books for my classes, which also meant that like I think 8 books that I had on my August TBR, nope, was not getting to the last bit of it. So it's unfortunate, but you know, that stuff happens, and now I know for next August that like I should probably take that into account. Although it would have been nice if I had like the syllabus earlier, and so if I could have known that I was gonna have to have a book half read essentially by the last day of August, I could have included that on my TBR. But it's fine. So I'm just gonna go over some stats, and then I'll go through the actual books. I only have 3 stats this month just because I don't know what else you guys want to know. So leave me a comment and tell me if there's any other sort of like statistic that you want, because I use a spreadsheet that actually tracks a lot of information. So, you know, if you want to know like what years I tend to read from, or something, like, I don't know. I track a lot of information, so just tell me what you want and I'll put it in. But for pages read in August, I read 1,242 pages. So that's only counting the physical books. I don't count the pages of the audiobooks that I read, because that seems like cheating. But I listened to 2 audiobooks in August, but I listened to 30 hours. Actually, I technically listened to more. I probably listened to closer to 40, because at the end of the month I had finished listening to Fellowship of the Ring, which is one of the books I'll talk about, and I started 2 Towers immediately, and so I got almost halfway through it before September hit. So that will be in the September wrap up, but just know I did have about 40 hours, not 30. I'm only counting the 30 because those are finished books. So I'll have to remember that when I do my September wrap up and say that I listened to about like 11 hours of 2 Towers in September. There's too much rhyming there. And then my average rating was, my average rating is always like, I think higher than it probably should be, and definitely higher than like other booktubers. My monthly average was 3.91 out of 5. But I also think like I had a pretty decent month. Like, there was only 1 book that I really did not like, and I will talk about it, obviously. So, I mean, even with the nonfiction, like, I still like the nonfiction, even though it took me so much longer. So, am I too generous, or did I just have a good month? Who knows? So the first book that I finished in August was an audiobook, and I listened to Northanger, Abbey by Jane Austen. And for the most part, I did enjoy this. I do like Austen as an author. Pride and Prejudice is still my number 1. I don't think that's going to change, quite honestly. Knowing what I do about the books that I have left that I haven't read, I think Pride and Prejudice is still going to be at the top. I did have higher hopes for this, though. it was just like, to me, it was just a little nonsensical sometimes. So Pride and Prejudice is about this girl named Catherine. In the reading vlog from like the first week of August, I couldn't remember her name. And so when I was filming a clip when I wasn't at home, I kept calling her like maybe Charlotte because I knew it started with a C. I was wrong. It's Catherine. But this book is about Catherine, who goes with some like family friends to Bath, I believe, on like a 6-week like winter holiday. And there she ends up meeting this like other woman that she starts getting along with really well, and like things are totally fine. She also meets a man there that she's interested in. I believe his name is Tilney. Yeah, because I kept wanting to say Tinley. And so she starts forming these relationships. She's invited back to Northanger Abbey, which is where Tilney lives with his father and sister. And Catherine and her little group of friends are like really into like gothic novels that were really popular at the time. And so Northanger Abbey, she's expecting to be like very like gothic and creepy and, you know, just like from the novels that she loves. And and that's where it sort of lost me a little bit. Not because I can't relate. I can. Absolutely I can. If someone invited me to like a gothic architecture place, I would immediately be like, where are the ghosts? Like, I get it. It's the decisions that Catherine made that I was just like, what? Why? Why is that why? Like, on one level, I got it because she was influenced by the books that she loves. But on the other one, I'm like, logic, my dear. Please use logic. And so there was just one section in particular that I just sort of lost me. So I ended up giving it 3.5 because I liked the rest of the book, except for that one plot point that was resolved, like, for as big as it became, it was resolved very quickly. So it was just like, okay. It felt unnecessary almost, but it was necessary because of the meaning behind the book. The book is written as like a parody of like gothic novels, so I understood why the plot was there, but it just felt stupid. So I gave it 3.5. I did really enjoy it. Jane Austen's writing is awesome. Catherine, except for that one thing, is a good character. The other characters were fairly well-rounded. Like, it's just a good book. That plot point really just aggravated me. Next, I read The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu by Joshua Hammer. So this was my first nonfiction. It actually, like, it took me less time than I thought it would to read. I think I read it in, like, a little over a week, maybe. Primarily, this one librarian, Hydera, I believe is his name, who went and collected a lot of manuscripts from the Timbuktu, Mali area that, like, essentially they were just a ton of manuscripts, tons from, like, I think, like, the 12th century to, like, the 15th or 16th century that were just, like, kept as, like, heirlooms for families. And so part of his job as, like, an archivist was to go and ask/convince these people to give him the manuscripts to put in a library to show the history from that area. And so that part was really, really cool. And then it went into, like, once the library had been built, because people were like, oh, that is really cool, I'm going to build my own library. And Hydera was like, great. So there were, like, 30 libraries, like, private libraries in Timbuktu showing manuscripts. It was really cool, actually. So, but then it continued going into, like, the early 2000s with the rise of Al-Qaeda and how that threatened the manuscripts, and how Hydera and the other librarians in the Mali area, what lengths they went to protect the manuscripts again. And so that part was really cool. But in the middle, there was, like, a really big section giving, like, the background of Al-Qaeda, which I get it, because that background information is not known to everyone. I didn't know a lot of it. And so, like, that is necessary. But at a certain point, I forgot I was reading about librarians. And I was like, why did I pick up a book on terrorism? It's not really my thing. So, like, I get it, because it definitely had a part in the story. And that was very important. But because of that, like, very brief moment of, like, what am I reading about again? I ended up giving it a 4.5. It was really well written. It was pretty accessible language. It wasn't too much. Like, when we were talking about the different, like, terrorist groups, it lost me a little bit. One, just because, like, I don't know a ton about it by my own choice, pretty much. It was just, like, a lot of acronyms and people to keep straight, and they kept moving, and it was just a lot. So, but I did really like it. It was really well written. It was great learning about this this history that I didn't know much about. And while it's not going to become, like, a thing for me, I like fluffy things. I don't like thinking about how horrible the world is. I know it's horrible. I read to escape that. So I'm not probably gonna read any more about that. It was really cool to learn. Next, I don't have a book for this. I read Horns by Joe Hill for my family book club. It was my dad's choice, and people had very different reactions to it. I actually enjoyed it. I was surprised. I was very surprised, but I did enjoy it for it being more. It's not really a thriller, but it's, I don't know, it's something. Sorry, my cat is being weird right in front of me. So Horns is more fantasy than anything else, but it does have, like, thriller elements, I think. And so I honestly just wasn't expecting to like it because of the story. It has a plot point that I'm not a huge fan of, but it does make sense. So, okay. But essentially, Horns is about this guy named Ignatius, he goes by Ig, whose girlfriend was murdered the year before, and everyone thinks that he did it. He didn't. We find out who the real murderer is fairly quickly, but in the meantime, at the beginning of the book, Ig wakes up from, like, a bender because of his grief, and he has horns growing out of his head, like double horns. And that comes with a lot of weird side effects, even weirder than horns growing out of his head. And so I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was, I did this a lot during my vlog. I wouldn't say it was enjoyable, because it dealt with some really heavy subjects. Definitely check trigger warnings. But I gave it 4 stars. I'll put it that way. I didn't enjoy it. I wouldn't even say that I liked it, because I don't think you're meant to. Or at least if you're thinking about it beyond just, like, oh, this is a story. Like, there are a lot of, like, disturbing elements to this book. It's a disturbing book. Don't think you're supposed to like it. It was well written, and I gave it 4 stars. Take that as you will. Next, I read Wonder of Wonders by Alisa Solomon. This is the cultural history of Fiddler on the Roof, which goes from the stories of Tevye being written by Shalom Aleichem in, the early 1900s, and then, like, his desire for it to be put on Broadway. Unfortunately, he did end up passing before that happened. And then the story continues with, like, other people's interests in putting the story of Tevye on stage, and then continuing to the actual, like, Broadway show that we know, and then the movies, and then the different productions. And so it really goes into, like, the cultural history and, like, how people responded to it. And so it was really cool, and it did make me want to watch Fiddler on the Roof. I haven't yet. I think I've seen it like once, and it was a very long time ago. And so I feel like maybe I should have watched it before I started reading it. But I still learned a lot. I'm really interested in it. And I thought it was just really cool to look at this other, piece of Jewish culture, because that's what it is now. It is a piece of Jewish culture. But it's also a piece of other cultures as well. And that's sort of what it went into, is that like there, she kept coming up to this anecdote from like one of the producers of the Broadway show that, it was put on in other countries as well. And I guess one of the producers was talking to someone who put on the show in Japan about like how Japanese the story felt instead of like how Jewish it felt. And so like that was really cool as well, because it deals with a lot of themes that I think are very present in a lot of different cultures. I gave it 4 stars. It was sort of the same thing with The Baddest Librarians of Timbuktu. There weren't as many times where I forgot what I was reading about. But there were some times where I'm like, why am I reading about this? Like, this seems like so tangentially related. It was interesting, but it seemed like she just needed another chapter. So because of that, I did give it 4 stars. I definitely read it slower than I did The Baddest Librarians of Timbuktu, which maybe impacted my enjoyment. Maybe. I don't know. After that, I finished listening to Fellowship of the Ring. Yes, this is my super nice edition. But it's also the only edition of the single book that I have. All the other editions that I have are like the whole trilogy in one. So, Fellowship of the Ring, it's the first book in Lord of the Rings series, and it starts with Frodo inheriting, essentially, this ring of power and learning about it and being horrified that his uncle had it for 50 years, which is fair. And sort of it's the start of this, high fantasy journey. And clearly I love Tolkien. My channel is named after a hobbit. A hobbit's reading list, because I identify as a hobbit. So I gave it 5 stars. I felt silly rating it, quite honestly. Because I'm like, it's gonna be 5 stars. Of course I love it. Of course it's perfect. Obviously it's not perfect. There are some things. But I gave it 5 stars. It's exactly my brand of fantasy. And that's the most important thing. The final book that I read in August was Psmith and the City by P.G. Wodehouse. I read this for the podcast that I do with my dad, the works of P.G. Wodehouse, and I don't even remember when, but like during the summer. During the summer, I read the first book that had Psmith in it. Psmith is a character who I absolutely hate. I do. I think he's super pretentious. He's super manipulative. He thinks he's like God's gift to the world. And I want to shove him off a cliff. Sorry. And I know that like some people like Psmith as a character, and that's wonderful. I'm sure you really enjoy his books, which is amazing. I do not. So I gave Psmith and the City a 2.5. Which honestly is only because of Mike, who is the other main character. Mike is my sweet darling boy, and he deserves a much better friend than Smith. But Psmith and the City is essentially about Mike and Smith going to work in a bank. They work together, and Smith decides that the manager of the bank needs to be taught a lesson, apparently, in how to speak with Smith. And he makes this man's life a living hell. Which to me, just think of the sentence that I just said. He's the manager of the bank that Smith just started working at. Doesn't that sound insane? But he does it. It was just aggravating. Luckily, I don't have to read about Smith for another couple months. Which is great. Love that for me. So, yes. those were the 6 books I read. I still say, like, I did pretty well. Honestly, I'm impressed that I read over 1,000 pages. I didn't think that I had. So, good on me. And then September is the Tolkien readathon that I created. So, you can go check out the video for that. Follow the card up here. And check out the vlogs for it. But I will give you a wrap-up of all the books I read for the Tolkien readathon in October. Yeah. Alright, so leave a comment if you've read any of these books or you want to read any of these books. Like the video, subscribe, click the notification bell, all that jazz, and then I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye!